I'm happy to be with you all who are watching tonight. I apologize for the background noise that you're going to hear. I'm actually on my way home back to Austin from Fort Worth, where we were spending some time on a large ranch in the Dallas-Fort Worth area to discuss development for the ranch and what that looks like and next steps. So it's kind of fitting, but I couldn't make it quite home. So here we are at Whole Foods. I hope that's okay. Next slide, please, Nick. So, development is about asking the right questions so that you know which steps to take to achieve the outcome that you want, right? Asking the right questions to take the right steps to achieve the outcome you want. That's going to be different for every family, for every ranch, because not all land is the same and not all land has the same values. Next slide, please, Nick. And a great way to consider everything that's at stake is to look at the macro perspective and the micro perspective. And what do you mean by that, Eric? I mean, like what's the big thing that's going on with your property, around your property? Like what are the forces outside the survey boundaries of your property that are at work that you need to consider? That's the macro. The micro is what is unique about your property and your family situation, right? That's going to affect how you may or may not want to develop your property. So the macro and the micro. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to start by just asking a couple of macro questions before we get to the micro questions, so that you can see what I'm talking about. So a great example is, where's your land? Right? Kind of a duh kind of question, right? But where's your land? And why that's important is because we want to know who has the authority. Are you is your land completely in a county's jurisdiction? Are you in the extraterritorial jurisdiction of a city? Right? This matters. This matters because you want to know who you need to go to start initiating development, who's going to issue the permits, what their rules and regulations are, right? Is your land completely within the city limits of a city? If so, there's going to be zoning regulations, right? So you want to know who has the authority. Next slide, please. Secondly, what's going on around your land. A lot of times, even if you are not within a city's limits, for example, or if you're in the ETJ, you're going to be impacted by a city's grand plan. Cities have to put out, or usually put out, these comprehensive plans that show what the city plans to do with itself over the next decade or so. And these plans include things like annexation for surrounding areas, transportation, these grand things that you may not be realizing your land has already been flagged for without your notice, okay? So even though you might not be in a city, you want to ask yourself, is my property going to be impacted by one of these municipal comprehensive plans? Is my property going to face annexation? Okay, that's a really big question. If you're in a city's ETJ, you have a very strong chance of being annexed if you decide to develop your property, right? Because that becomes a good tax base for the city, becomes attractive. Transportation plans are super important. For example, on the ranch we were at today, they didn't realize that there's a thoroughfare that's planned to go through the middle of their property, right? That's on a county transportation plan. So it's really, really important to know whether or not you have a road that's planned to come through your property at some time in the future. That impacts what you may want to do with your property. And roads going through your property are not always a bad thing, right? Sometimes this really increases property values for that road frontage. And you want to know what's the development like around your property? Are there subdivisions in place that are being built around you? Is there industrial sites? Are there commercial sites? Is there retail space? Like, what is going on around you? What school district would your property track to? These are the macro questions you want to be thinking about to help influence and inform what you want to do with your own particular property. Next slide. Micro question number one. drilling in on your particular tract of land. Who owns it? Right. Again, this is one of these kind of questions, but you need to figure it out, right? I mean, is it held by family? Are there brothers and sisters who are tenants in common, you know, who are each own a piece of the whole? That's fine, but like, who's going to call the shots? Are you guys going to be able to agree on what you want to do with your property? Right? It's really, really important, and you know, figuring that out could save a lot of cost and heartache and finances down the road. Do you want to consider setting up a business entity, right, to help protect some of your assets, protect the land that you want to develop? Do you want to shield yourself in case something happens down the road by having them in like having your ranch or your property in a family limited partnership or an LLC? You know, so this is what I mean by like who owns the property. It's really, really important to figure out. Another question that's related to this is there a clear title chain, right? Like you may take it for granted, but you want to be able to definitively show that you can trace the deeds to your ranch back to your grandma's grandma or whoever they might end up with. You want to know, like, are there easements on your property? Like, did Grandpa Joe give a blanket easement to an energy company back in the 40s that hasn't been extinguished? You probably don't know that off the top of your head. That's an important piece of information if you're trying to figure out whether or not to develop your property, right? So these are questions that we're trying to get at when we ask the question, or answer trying to get at when we ask the question, who owns the land? Next slide. This is a big one. Where's the water coming from? It's one of the most fundamental questions you can ask along with the other ones. If there's no water, there's no project. It's that simple. If there's no water, there's no development on your range. And you might say, well, Eric, I have a well dug. You know, we've been using this for generations. You know, that's fine. But is it going to be able to pump at sufficient rates to sustain a residential subdivision? Are you going to have to pull groundwater conservation district permits to drill additional wells? Do you have water rights allocations from a river that's adjoining your property? Or is there a special utility district that services your water? Or are you in a city limit or the ETJ of a city limit where you can get municipal water lines ran to your property? And do you know what that might cost? We have some clients who are jumped in onto some property and didn't realize that they were going to be hit with an $800,000 to $1 million infrastructure investment to run the necessary water lines to their property to get water. It's kind of a big deal, right? So figuring out, you know, where the water is coming from is a fundamental question, and not just if you have water, but are you going to have enough for the plans that you have in mind in the future? Next slide. What are the issues with the land? Right. This is a big one. You know, all land is unique, and so the ranch we are looking at today had significant amounts of floodplain on the property. You may be familiar with floodplain or the term, but you may not realize that there's different kinds. You know, there's 500-year floodplain, 100-year floodplain, 25-year floodplain, and the regulations and the ability to develop can be greatly impacted by floodplain on your property. In a lot of cases, 100-year floodplain isn't advisable to develop in. Some counties and local jurisdictions allow you to do that, but you have to go through a rigorous development process. Buildings have to be flood proofed, things like that you need to take in mind, take into consideration. Floodplain can offer a chance. This is making lemonade out of lemons. Floodplain can offer a chance to have a conservation part of your property. right? Instead of seeing it as, oh man, we have floodplain, we're not going to be able to use that property. That's right for a park dedication, open space, or even if you have a large enough tract, a possible conservation easement, depending on this particular floodplain. So there are great ways to make use of it, but it's really important to know if you have floodplain on your property. That's going to impact your ability to develop. Endangered species, right? That's a big one. Are you in warbler habitat, right? I mean, there are specific rules and regulations that can shut down a project faster than anything if you have an endangered species that's found on your property. We had a great example where a highway was coming through a client's property, a major corridor highway, and the whole highway had to be moved over because they found an endangered species of tree on our client's property. How about that, right? So all that is to say that this kind of thing matters. It's important to know. Access. Are you going to have access to your what's your access like to your ranch? Is there going to be sufficient access? Is your property on a highway, right? Is it on a highway? There are rules and regulations about highway access. There's spacing requirements. If you subdivide your property, each tract needs to have access to a public right-of-way, right? It needs to be accessible by a county road or something along those lines, because an EMS vehicle has to be able to get back to that tract that you're creating. That's an important question that you need to be able to ask. And surveys and plats, like is your specific property surveyed? When's the last time you had a survey pulled? Okay, that's a really good question you need to ask, because fences don't always make boundary lines, right? That's you'd be surprised, if you go and map out the meets and bounds of your ranch, whether or not they track a fence that's been there for 40 years, and whether or not your neighbor's encroaching into your ranch, or you're encroaching into your neighbor's ranch. Like, you're going to have to answer those questions. So having a good survey is really important. And plats, what I mean by plat is a super fancy survey that has to follow a lot of rules and regulations from a local governmental jurisdiction. I mean, they're going to control things like your font size, and usually require drainage studies or something along those lines, where you're going to have to get a professional in to satisfy the platting requirements. They're usually pretty expensive. You're looking at a minimum of $10,000, $11,000 for a simple plat. They can go up to $40,000. But these are all considerations on development. And next slide. And really importantly is that you need a team. And I can't overstate this. Successful development involves surrounding yourself with the right people. Some of these people look like possibly a commercial real estate agent, definitely an engineer, maybe an appraiser, to see what the highest and best use of your property is, and what the going rate is for properties like yours. Definitely need a surveyor, right? Because we were talking about that on the last slide. And unfortunately, you're going to need an attorney. I hate to break it to you, but don't wait until you're already in the mess. Find a good representative to keep you out of it. And and folks like Plateau and the professionals at Plateau who can help you talk about possible wildlife management opportunities, things you can do with open space on your property that you might not have realized. There's ways to develop a property, but also have wildlife habitat that get really creative to help you not only conserve a piece of property that's really important to you, but to keep it beautiful and to keep it Texas. And the folks you're about to hear from know all about that. So thank you for your time. I hope that was informative and I didn't rush too fast. And I hope you guys have a great evening. Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I forgot that part. I forgot the shine slide.
That was wonderful, Eric. Thank you so much. Lots of very valuable information to take in consideration, especially as Texas continues to grow. Thank you again for covering this topic and for joining us this evening.
Of course. Have a great evening, guys.
You as well. Thank you.